The vase shattered against the wall, splintering into 100 tiny pieces, scattering like the remains of us. I watched the fragments hit the ground, each sharp edge reflecting the sun as it bled through the kitchen window. Sophia stood across from me, her face a mix of anger and hurt, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. She always did that when she didn't want to show how much something had gotten to her, crossed her arms like a shield, as if it could protect her from the truth. Was that necessary, Tom? She snapped, her voice laced with a forced calm that only made me angrier. Maybe not, but it got your attention, didn't it? I shot back, my heart pounding, a familiar bitterness rising in my throat. The arguments had become a routine, like some twisted dance we performed daily, and I was tired of it. So damn tired. Outside, the backyard was a mess. Bags of soil, stacks of pavers, and plants in black plastic pots were scattered everywhere, waiting to be transformed into the beautiful garden we'd been planning for months. Or at least, that's what Lucas kept telling us it would be, a new start, a place to find peace, reconnect, all that crap. I bought into it for a while. Thought maybe, just maybe, digging our hands into the earth would somehow fix us. But now, standing here in the wreckage of another pointless fight, I knew better. I turned away from Sophia and stared out at the half-finished garden. Lucas was out there somewhere, probably measuring something or sketching another damn flower bed, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside the house. Or maybe he knew, and that was part of the thrill for him, playing the hero while screwing his best friend's wife behind his back. The thought made my blood boil. How did we get here, Tom? Sophia's voice wavered, softer this time, but it didn't reach me. I'd heard it all before, the regret, the apologies, the promises to do better. None of it mattered anymore. Not after what I'd seen on her phone, that late-night text from Lucas, the one that had confirmed what I'd been dreading for months. You want to know how we got here? Look outside. I pointed to the backyard, to the mess we were pretending would somehow heal us. That's us. All those half-dead plants, the weeds growing between the stones, that's our marriage. And you. I paused, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. You're the one who let it die. Sophia flinched as if I'd struck her, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. But I didn't care. Not anymore. I was done feeling guilty, done pretending everything was fine when it was anything but. I tried, Tom. I really did. Her voice broke, and for a second, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered that message. Lucas's words, dripping with intimacy. I miss you already. Can't wait to see you again. I had stared at that screen for what felt like hours, reading and rereading, trying to understand how the two people I trusted most had turned me into a fool. Yeah, well, trying isn't enough, I said, my voice flat, emotionless. I pushed past her and stepped outside. The cool air hitting my face like a slap. Lucas was there, crouched by a row of rose bushes, his hands dirty, his expression focused, like he was solving some great mystery. He looked up and flashed that easy smile, the one that used to make me think he was just a good guy. Now, it just made me sick. How's it going, man? Lucas called out, wiping his hands on his jeans as he stood. I wanted to punch that smile off his face, make him feel the same pain he'd inflicted on me. But instead, I just nodded. It's coming together, I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. Slowly but surely. Lucas chuckled, oblivious, or pretending to be. Good things take time. Yeah, I muttered, looking at the plants he'd chosen. Thorny roses, half-wilted lilies, and ivy that crawled like a disease over the garden walls. Time. That's what it takes. As Lucas returned to his work, I stood there, staring at the garden that was supposed to be our fresh start. But now, it was something else. It was my plan, my quiet revenge. Lucas thought he was planting the seeds of a beautiful new life. What he didn't know was that every plant, every stone, would tell a different story. A story of lies, betrayal, and everything that had brought us to this point. This wasn't just a garden. It was a graveyard for all the things we'd lost. And soon, everyone would see it for what it really was. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed next to Sophia, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. My mind raced with the images of her and Lucas together. I'd watch the ceiling fan spin lazily above us, and every turn felt like a slow, relentless reminder of the mess we were in. Sleep didn't come easy anymore, and when it did, it was filled with nightmares that had a funny way of blending into reality. Sophia stirred beside me, turning her back, just like she did every night now. There was a time when she'd roll over and tuck herself into me, her warmth a comfort against the world. But now, there was this invisible wall between us, cold, unspoken, and impossible to ignore. I got up quietly, careful not to wake her, and walked to the kitchen. The house was dark, the silence heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stood by the window, staring out at the garden Lucas had promised would be our sanctuary. It was still a work in progress, but every day it took shape, slowly morphing into something entirely different from what Sophia thought it would be. I'd spent hours researching, finding plants that held the meanings I needed them to. I picked out gardenias for unrequited love, foxgloves for insincerity, and hydrangeas for heartlessness. The symbolism was my secret weapon, each choice deliberate, every bloom a small act of vengeance. Lucas had suggested a centerpiece, a tall, beautiful tree to represent new beginnings, but I had other plans. I chose a dead, gnarled tree with twisted branches, one that looked like it had seen better days. It fits perfectly. Couldn't sleep? Sophia's voice startled me. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her silhouette outlined by the dim kitchen light. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of everything we weren't saying. No, I replied simply, taking a slow sip of my drink. The burn in my throat was a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. Sophia walked over, leaning against the counter, her eyes fixed on the same view of the garden. "It's going to be beautiful when it's done," she said softly, her voice tinged with a sadness she couldn't quite hide. "Lucas has really put his heart into it." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to respond with the sarcasm that was boiling just beneath the surface. Instead, I nodded. "Yeah, he sure has." We stood there in silence, side by side but miles apart. I wondered if she thought about what she was doing, how every touch, every secret meeting with Lucas was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Or maybe she was so wrapped up in whatever fantasy they'd created that she couldn't see the destruction they were leaving behind. Either way, the garden would be my way of making sure she never forgot. The next morning, I met Lucas in the backyard as usual. He was already hard at work, planting a row of lilies along the edge of the pathway. I watched him for a moment, studying the concentration on his face. He looked so damn innocent, like he was just some regular guy trying to make something beautiful. But I knew better. "You've really outdone yourself, man," I said, stepping closer. "The garden's coming together." Lucas glanced up, grinning as he wiped the sweat from his brow. "Thanks. I just want it to be perfect for you guys, you know?" I swallowed back the bitterness. "Yeah, I can see that." We spent the day working side by side, but the tension was palpable. I watched him move and listened to the way he talked about Sophia with just a little too much affection, and it was all I could do not to lose it right there. But I kept my cool. I needed him to keep thinking everything was fine, that I was none the wiser to his betrayal. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, Lucas packed up his tools and clapped me on the shoulder. "We're almost there, Tom. Just a few more finishing touches." I forced a smile. "Yeah, almost." After he left, I stayed behind, surveying the progress. The garden was a masterpiece of deceit, a beautiful lie built on the ruins of our past. I walked along the winding path, pausing at each plant, my mind running through the stories they told. The foxgloves swayed in the breeze, their purple petals bright against the dirt, hiding their poisonous nature just like Lucas. I reached out and touched one of the flowers, its softness at odds with the bitterness I felt. This garden wasn't just a petty act of revenge. It was a living, breathing narrative of every broken promise, every lie, and every moment that had led us here. And soon, Sophia and Lucas would have to face it, just as I had. They would see every twist and turn of their affair reflected in the garden's design. And when the time came, when all of our friends and family were gathered, I would tell them exactly what each piece meant. I stood in the center, where Lucas's tree was supposed to go. Instead, there would be that dead, twisted monument to our failed marriage, a stark reminder that some things can never be brought back to life. It would stand tall and broken, just like I felt every day. I glanced back at the house, the lights inside flickering on as evening settled in. This was my chance to rewrite the narrative, to take control of a story that had spun out of my hands long ago. The garden was my voice, my confession, and my condemnation all in one. And when it was finished, it would be impossible for Sophia and Lucas to ignore it. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs, and allowed myself a rare moment of satisfaction. The seeds of deceit were already sown. Now, all that was left was to watch them grow. By the time the weekend rolled around, the garden was nearly complete. I stood on the back porch, sipping my morning coffee and staring at the work we'd done. To anyone else, it looked like a simple, beautiful garden, a place to relax and escape. But I knew the truth. Every stone, every flower, every twisted vine told the real story. Sophia was inside, getting ready for the day. She had that distracted look about her, the kind she got when she was thinking about Lucas. I knew she was meeting him later, but I didn't say anything. What was the point? Confrontation didn't scare them anymore, it just pushed them deeper underground. And I needed them right where I could see them. Lucas showed up around noon with a tray of plants and his usual easy smile. "Hey, Tom, thought I'd get an early start today," he said, setting the tray down near the centerpiece where the dead tree was now firmly planted. "Sure thing, we're almost there," I nodded, keeping my tone light. I had to keep playing my role, the trusting, unsuspecting husband who was just grateful his friend was helping him out. As Lucas worked, I moved around the garden, adjusting things here and there, and fine-tuning my creation. He didn't notice when I swapped a few of his choices with my own, a row of poppies symbolizing falsehood, daffodils for unrequited love. It was all part of the plan. The garden had to be perfect, not just aesthetically, but as a representation of every lie, every betrayal that had poisoned my marriage. We worked in near silence, the sound of shovels hitting dirt the only thing between us. Sophia came outside later, offering drinks, her smile bright but forced. She glanced at Lucas and I saw the flicker of something between them, guilt. Maybe, or just the thrill of getting away with it. It didn't matter. Soon, they wouldn't be able to hide behind their secret looks and stolen moments. "So, what do you think?" Lucas asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. "It's looking good, right?" I glanced around, pretending to admire his work. "Yeah, it's coming together. Exactly what we wanted." I paused, letting my gaze linger on the dead tree. "Though I'm still not sure about that tree. It's different." Lucas shrugged. "It's a statement piece. Something to remind you that even when things seem dead, there's still life underneath, waiting to come back." I nearly laughed at the irony. He had no idea what that tree really meant. To him, it was just another quirky design choice. To me, it was the rotting heart of our marriage, standing there for all to see. Sophia wandered over, her eyes scanning the garden with a mix of pride and sadness. "It's beautiful, Lucas. Thank you." Lucas smiled, that easy, confident grin that used to make me feel grateful for his friendship. Now, it just made me want to tear the whole place apart. "It's all for you guys," he said, casting a quick glance at Sophia. "You deserve a place that makes you feel at peace." Peace. The word hung in the air like a joke no one wanted to laugh at. Sophia and Lucas might have found peace in their stolen moments, but there was no peace for me. Not yet. When Lucas left for the day, I stayed behind, watering the plants and making final adjustments. The event was set for next weekend, and the invitations had gone out, friends, family, and everyone who knew us. They all thought they were coming to celebrate a new chapter in our lives. In a way, they were right. It just wasn't the chapter they expected. As I walked through the garden, I rehearsed what I would say. Each plant had a story. The wilting lilies near the entrance were for the early days of our marriage when everything seemed perfect on the surface but was slowly dying underneath. The dark ivy crawling over the trellis represented the lies that had spread through every corner of our lives, choking the trust we once had. And then there was the dead tree, the grand finale, a monument to the final, crushing betrayal. I pictured the crowd gathered around, listening as I unveiled the meaning behind each carefully chosen piece of the garden. I imagined the look on Sophia's face when she realized this wasn't just about the garden. It was about exposing the truth she and Lucas had tried so hard to hide. I could already see the shock, the anger, the humiliation. But most of all, I wanted her to feel what I'd been feeling for months. The slow, suffocating pain of being blindsided by the people you trusted most. Sophia called out from the kitchen, breaking my thoughts. "Tom, dinner's ready." I glanced at the tree one last time before heading inside. Sophia had set the table with our best dishes, lighting candles as if we were about to have some kind of romantic evening. I wondered if this was her attempt to make things right, to pretend everything was still salvageable. But it was too late for that. As we ate in silence, I watched her, searching for any sign that she knew what was coming. But she just picked at her food, lost in her own world. I wanted to ask her if she'd thought about what she was doing, if she'd ever considered the cost. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. Instead, I finished my meal, thanked her, and went back outside, sitting on the porch until the stars came out. I watched the garden in the dim light, the twisted branches of the tree casting shadows across the yard. The garden was almost complete, and so was my plan. In just a few days, Sophia and Lucas would see it for what it truly was. A mirror reflecting their lies, their betrayal, and the ruins of everything we once had. The perfect lie, wrapped in flowers and vines. And soon, it would all be laid bare. The week leading up to the event passed in a blur of last-minute preparations and restless nights. Sophia was buzzing with excitement, talking about how the garden was going to be a fresh start for us. I let her believe that. Let her think this garden would be the thing to pull us back together. Every time she smiled at me, every time she wrapped her arms around my neck, I played my part, giving just enough to keep up the facade. Lucas was over every day, tweaking the layout, and adding finishing touches to the garden. I watched him, keeping my anger buried beneath a mask of indifference. He walked around the garden like it was his masterpiece, a symbol of his talents and generosity. But I knew the truth. He was just as much a part of the mess as Sophia was, and soon, everyone else would see it too. The morning of the event, the garden looked perfect, or as perfect as I designed it to look. The plants were in full bloom, the paths were neatly laid out, and the dead tree stood tall in the center, its twisted branches reaching out like skeletal arms. Guests would be arriving in a few hours, and the whole setup was flawless. Even Sophia looked relieved, as if she believed this garden was some kind of miracle that would save us. I stood by the entrance, inspecting the final details, when Lucas joined me, hands on his hips, surveying his work. "Looks great, doesn't it?" he asked, a hint of pride in his voice. "Yeah, it does," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Thanks for everything, Lucas. I couldn't have done it without you." He clapped me on the back, oblivious to the weight of my words. "Hey, it's what friends are for, right?" "Friends," I nodded, forcing a smile. "Right." Sophia came out, dressed in a light blue summer dress, her hair flowing in soft waves. She looked beautiful, radiant even, but there was a shadow in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I wondered if she could feel the tension building, the calm before the storm. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice a mix of nerves and excitement. I nodded, glancing at the garden one last time. "Yeah, I'm ready." Guests started to arrive, filling the yard with laughter and conversation. It was all small talk, polite smiles, and compliments about how beautiful the garden looked. Sophia mingled effortlessly, playing the perfect hostess, while Lucas charmed everyone with his easygoing demeanor. I watched them from the sidelines, counting down the minutes until it was time to pull back the curtain on their perfect little lie. When the garden was full of friends, family, and neighbors, I took my place at the center, standing beside the dead tree. Sophia joined me, her hand slipping into mine, squeezing tight. I could feel the tremble in her grip. Lucas stood off to the side, looking at us with that familiar, easy smile. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice loud enough to cut through the chatter. "This garden has been a labor of love, and it means a lot to have you all here to celebrate it with us." Sophia beamed, glancing at Lucas, and for a moment, I saw her relax. She had no idea what was coming. "But this garden isn't just about flowers and paths," I continued, my tone shifting. "It's a story of love, of loss, and of everything in between." I walked over to the lilies, pointing to the white petals tinged with brown at the edges. "These lilies represent the early days of our marriage, beautiful on the outside but already starting to wilt. They were a reminder that even the best things can fall apart if you're not paying attention." Sophia's smile faltered, her grip on my hand loosening. I moved to the ivy, the dark green vines twisting around the trellis. "And this ivy? It's for the lies, the ones that creep in when you're not looking. Wrapping around everything good until there's nothing left but rot." Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his smile fading. The guests glanced at each other, sensing the change in the atmosphere. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the whispered questions. I was only just getting started. I walked toward the foxgloves, their bell-shaped flowers deceptively innocent. "These are for insincerity. They look harmless, but they're poison. Just like pretending everything's fine when it's not." Sophia's face turned pale, her breath hitching. Lucas glanced at her, then at me, realization dawning too late. They both knew where this was headed, but neither of them could stop it now. And finally, I said, turning to the dead tree in the center, my voice heavy with the weight of every word. This tree is the heart of it all. Twisted, broken, but still standing. It's a reminder of betrayal, of trust shattered and love turned to dust. I looked directly at Lucas, then Sophia, letting the silence stretch. This garden isn't just a fresh start. It's a memorial to everything that went wrong. And today, I'm here to tell you all why. The crowd was dead silent. Eyes darted between me, Sophia, and Lucas. Sophia's hand slipped from mine, and she took a step back, her face a mix of shock and anger. Lucas stood frozen, his smile long gone, replaced by the stunned realization that his betrayal was about to be laid bare. I took a deep breath and continued, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Sophia and I were supposed to rebuild our lives together here, but that's not what happened, is it? Lucas, our friend, the one who helped us create this garden, wasn't just helping with the flowers. I could see Sophia's eyes widen, the first tears brimming, but I kept going. While we were out here planting seeds, Lucas and Sophia were planting something else. A betrayal that cut deeper than any thorn. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The whispers started, sharp and relentless, cutting through the stunned silence. Sophia covered her mouth, her eyes wide, pleading with me to stop. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. You thought this garden would be a secret, your safe place. But today, everyone sees it for what it really is, a testament to lies and deceit. I turned to the guests, meeting their shocked expressions. I chose every plant carefully, every symbol meticulously. This isn't just a garden, it's a confession of the truth you both tried to bury. Sophia looked at me, her voice breaking. Tom, please, this isn't the place. No, Sophia, I cut her off, my voice firm. This is exactly the place. This is where you two thought you could hide your affair, right under my nose. You turned what was supposed to be a symbol of hope into a graveyard of our marriage. Lucas tried to step forward, his face pale. Tom, man, let's not do this here. I turned on him, anger boiling over. Here is exactly where it happens. You thought you could play the good guy, helping me fix my marriage while you were tearing it apart behind my back. But now, everyone knows the truth. The crowd was shifting, some looking at Sophia with pity, others at Lucas with disgust. The reality of their actions was sinking in, the weight of public exposure heavier than either of them had anticipated. I could see it in their eyes, the shame, the fear, the realization that their secret was no longer safe. Sophia finally broke, tears streaming down her face. She reached out, but I stepped back, avoiding her touch. Tom, I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words but no longer caring. But it did, Sophia. It did. Lucas stood there, lost for words, his confidence shattered. He had nowhere to hide, no clever lines or excuses that could undo what had been done. He was just another man caught in his own lies, laid bare for everyone to see. I turned to face the garden one last time, taking in the irony of it all, the beauty built on deceit, the lies hidden in plain sight. This was no sanctuary, no place of healing. It was a testament to everything we'd lost, everything they'd destroyed. Without another word, I walked past Sophia and Lucas, leaving them to face the crowd, the whispers, and the mess they'd made. The garden was theirs now, every twisted branch, every poisonous bloom. They could have it. I was done. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, the lies were exposed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The garden, with all its twisted beauty, was no longer my burden to bear. It was theirs, and they would have to live with it, just as I had. The event ended in a blur of awkward goodbyes and hurried exits. I watched from a distance as our friends and neighbors filtered out, avoiding eye contact, not knowing what to say. Sophia stood near the entrance of the garden, eyes red and swollen, her posture slumped in defeat. Lucas had disappeared shortly after my speech, slipping away like the coward he was, unable to face the fallout. I stayed behind, watching the once vibrant garden that now felt like a graveyard of everything we'd once been. The flowers, the paths, the carefully placed stones, all of it seemed to mock me as if asking why I hadn't seen the truth sooner. I leaned against the fence, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. The rush of adrenaline was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Sophia approached me cautiously, her steps slow, as if she was afraid I might snap again. "Tom, can we talk?" Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. "What's left to talk about, Sophia?" I said, my eyes fixed on the dead tree. "Everything's already been said." She sat down on the edge of the stone path, burying her face in her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." I finally turned to her, feeling the anger simmer just beneath the surface. "But you did, Sophia. And not just once. Over and over again. You and Lucas turned our marriage into a game you thought you could win." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "It wasn't a game, Tom. I was just lost. I didn't know how to fix us, and Lucas was there. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake, and I'm sorry." I let out a bitter laugh. "Sorry? That's all you've got? After everything, you think an apology is going to fix this?" She flinched at my words, and for a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered the months of lies, the sneaking around, the way she'd made me feel like I was the one losing my mind. "I don't know what else to say," she whispered. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "There's nothing left to say. I gave you everything, Sophia. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for him." She opened her mouth to speak but stopped, knowing there was nothing she could say to undo the damage. We sat there in silence, the garden around us still and quiet, as if it too was waiting for some kind of resolution that would never come. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up, brushing off my jeans. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice tired. This garden was supposed to be a fresh start, but all it's done is show me how broken we really are. Sophia looked up, desperation in her eyes. "Tom, please. We can try again. We can fix this." I cut her off, shaking my head. "No, Sophia. We can't. Maybe once, a long time ago, we could have. But not now. Not after everything." She reached out, but I stepped back, keeping my distance. "I need some time to figure out what comes next. For me, for us, if there even isn't us anymore." Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't argue. She knew, just as I did, that some things were beyond repair. I walked away, leaving her there among the flowers, the vines, and the memories of what used to be. The garden was supposed to be a symbol of new beginnings, but now it was just a reminder of what we'd lost. As I headed inside, the weight of what had happened settled over me like a heavy fog. There was no going back. No undoing what had been done. All I could do was move forward, even if I wasn't sure where that would lead. Days turned into weeks, and the house felt emptier than ever. Sophia moved in with her sister temporarily, giving us both the space we needed. I stayed behind, surrounded by the silence of a home that no longer felt like mine. I avoided the garden, keeping the blinds drawn, not ready to face the monument of my failed marriage. It was easier to pretend it wasn't there, that it hadn't become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. I spent my days at work, throwing myself into projects, and staying late to avoid coming home. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every argument, every moment when I could have done something differently. I was angry, at Sophia, at Lucas, but mostly at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. One afternoon, I finally forced myself outside, drawn to the garden despite everything. The plants were still thriving, thanks to the automated watering system Lucas had set up. I walked the familiar paths, feeling the mix of anger and sadness wash over me. It was still beautiful, even if the meaning behind it was tainted. I stopped at the dead tree, its bare branches reaching out like twisted fingers. I'd always hated it, but now I couldn't bring myself to tear it down. It was a reminder of what had happened, but also a testament to the fact that I'd survived it. I'd stood there and exposed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. As I stood there, I thought about Sophia and Lucas. I hadn't spoken to either of them since that day. Sophia had tried to reach out a few times, but I wasn't ready to talk. I didn't know if I ever would be. Forgiveness felt like a distant concept, something that belonged to another version of me, one that wasn't bruised and bitter. I spent the next few weeks slowly reclaiming the garden, not as a memorial to our broken marriage, but as something that belonged to me. I pulled up some of the plants that felt too tied to bad memories, replacing them with new ones, bright, bold flowers that didn't carry the same weight. I left the dead tree, though, as a reminder of what I'd been through and what I'd overcome. Eventually, I got a call from Lucas. I let it go to voicemail, his voice shaky as he apologized again, trying to explain his side as if it would make a difference. But I didn't need explanations. I needed distance. I needed time to rebuild myself without the weight of their betrayal hanging over me. One afternoon, as I was working in the garden, my neighbor, Mrs. Grant, stopped by. She'd been at the event that day, and though she'd been kind enough not to pry, I could tell she had questions. "It's looking beautiful," she said, gesturing to the new plants I'd put in. "You've done a great job with it." I nodded, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Thanks. It's been therapeutic." She smiled, leaning on the fence. "Sometimes, all you can do is plant new seeds and hope for the best." I looked at her, appreciating the simplicity of her words. She didn't know the whole story, but she'd captured the essence of it. I was starting over, one small step at a time, even if the path wasn't clear yet. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I sat on the porch and watched the garden come alive with color. It wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. It had been months since the garden event, and the days had settled into a kind of uneasy routine. Sophia still stayed with her sister, and we only communicated through short, clipped texts about bills or the house. I was getting used to the quiet, but there were still moments when her absence felt like a gaping hole I couldn't ignore. The garden, now partially revamped, had become my sanctuary, a place where I could try to piece together whatever was left of my life. One evening, as I was trimming the rose bushes I'd recently planted, I heard the familiar sound of Sophia's car pulling up in the driveway. I hadn't expected her, and for a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. But I was tired of running, tired of avoiding the confrontation that hung between us like a dark cloud. She walked up slowly, her expression hesitant. She looked thinner, her usual confidence replaced by something more fragile. "Tom," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of hope and regret. "Can we talk?" I nodded, setting down my tools. "Sure." We sat on the porch steps, the air thick with unspoken words. Sophia glanced at the garden, her eyes lingering on the new flowers. "It's different," she said, almost wistfully. "Yeah, I needed a change," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded, her fingers nervously twisting the ring she still wore. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Tom. About us. About what happened. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't move on without saying some things." I stared at the horizon, unsure if I wanted to hear her out. But I stayed quiet, giving her the space to speak. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. "I betrayed you in the worst way possible. And it wasn't just about Lucas. It was about me, about feeling lost and trying to fill that emptiness in the wrong ways. But that doesn't excuse what I did." I swallowed, feeling the familiar sting of anger mixed with a sadness I couldn't quite shake. "Why Lucas, though, of all people?" she sighed, wiping at her eyes. "He was there when I felt like I was falling apart. It wasn't planned. It just happened. And I knew it was wrong, every step of the way, but I couldn't stop." I let her words hang in the air, trying to absorb them without letting the old wounds bleed again. "I can't say I understand, Sophia. I don't know if I ever will. But it's not just about what you did. It's about how we got here in the first place." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I know. We stopped talking. We stopped trying. And by the time I realized how far we'd drifted, it was too late." I shifted, feeling the weight of everything that had gone unspoken between us. Maybe we just lost ourselves somewhere along the way. And by the time we tried to find our way back, we weren't the same people anymore. Sophia looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you think we could ever be us again?" I took a deep breath, letting the question sink in. "I don't know, Sophia. A part of me wants to say yes, but another part. It's hard to forgive something that cuts this deep." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I get it. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." We sat there in silence, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden. It wasn't the resolution either of us wanted, but it was something. A step toward closure, even if it wasn't the happy ending we'd once hoped for. As Sophia got up to leave, she paused, looking back at me one last time. "I hope you find peace, Tom. You deserve it." I watched her walk away, her figure disappearing into the growing darkness. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, I felt like I could finally start moving on, even if the path ahead was uncertain. Life went on, as it always does. I spent more time at work, picked up new hobbies, and slowly started reconnecting with old friends. The garden continued to evolve, each change reflecting the slow but steady progress I was making in putting the past behind me. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I still felt the sting of everything that had happened. But I was learning to live with it. One afternoon, while I was working on adding some new flowers near the dead tree, Lucas showed up. I hadn't seen him since that day in the garden, and I wasn't particularly eager to see him now. But there he was, standing at the gate, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "Tom," he said, his voice subdued. "Can we talk?" I looked at him, feeling a surge of old anger, but also a strange sense of pity. He looked like he'd been carrying his own burden, just as heavy as mine. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit on the garden bench. He sat down, staring at the garden as if seeing it for the first time. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "You've done a great job." "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone flat. "But I doubt you came here to talk about the flowers." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything that happened. And I know I can't undo the past, but I wanted to face you, man to man. I owe you that much." I crossed my arms, waiting for him to continue. "I messed up, Tom. Big time. I crossed a line I never should have crossed, and I've lost sleep every night since. You were my friend, and I betrayed you in the worst way possible. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry." His words hung in the air, filled with regret and a level of honesty I hadn't expected. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of his apology, the sincerity in his voice. But forgiveness was a long road, one I wasn't sure I was ready to walk. "I appreciate you saying that, Lucas," I finally said. "But you need to understand that what you did, it wasn't just some mistake. It ripped apart my life." Lucas nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. "I know. I've lost a lot too. My reputation, my friendships. But most of all, I lost your trust. And I'll have to live with that." We sat there in silence, the tension between us still palpable but not as sharp as before. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage below and realizing that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go. "I'm trying to move on, Lucas," I said finally. "But that doesn't mean I can just forget what happened. It's going to take time." He nodded, standing up slowly. "I understand. I just needed to say my piece. I'm truly sorry, Tom. I hope one day we can both find some kind of peace." I watched him walk away, disappearing down the street without looking back. It wasn't the reconciliation of old friends. But it was something. A closing of the chapter that had been left unfinished for too long. As I turned back to the garden, I felt a strange sense of calm. The past was still there, woven into every flower and every path, but it no longer held the same power over me. I was learning to let go, one day at a time, and in that small victory, I found a sliver of hope. I knelt by the new flowers, touching the delicate petals, feeling the pulse of life that continued to thrive despite everything. The garden had been born out of betrayal, but it was mine now, my story, my survival, my new beginning. And that, I realized, was enough. It took time, but life began to take on a new rhythm. I was still learning how to navigate the pieces of my life that had been shattered, but each day felt like a small step forward. I focused on myself for the first time in years, working out, cooking meals from scratch, and even picking up photography, something I hadn't done since college. I found solace in capturing the world through a lens, seeing things from a different perspective, something I desperately needed. One day, as I was editing some photos in the living room, I got a text from Sophia. It was short, just a few lines asking if I'd be willing to meet. I stared at my phone for a long time, debating whether I was ready to open that door again. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward without looking back. But another part of me knew that we still had unfinished business, conversations that needed to happen if either of us were ever going to truly move on. We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown, a neutral space that felt safe. When I walked in, Sophia was already there, nervously stirring her coffee. She looked up when she saw me, offering a small, tentative smile. "Hey," she said softly, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of how this meeting might go. "Hey," I replied, sitting down across from her. It felt strange, like meeting an old friend after years apart, Only this time, the air between us was heavy with everything we'd been through. We exchanged small talk at first, updates about work, her living situation, the mundane details of life that once felt so significant. But eventually, the conversation turned to us, as it always did. "I've been going to therapy," Sophia admitted, her voice filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in a long time. "Trying to understand why I did what I did. I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm trying to be better." I nodded, appreciating her honesty even if it didn't erase the past. "That's good. I've been working on myself too. This whole thing made me realize how much I'd been ignoring." She looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I miss us, Tom. I miss what we had. But I know it's gone, and I have to accept that." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I miss it too, sometimes. But I've also realized that the version of us I miss wasn't real, at least not in the end. And I'm not sure we can ever go back to what we were." Sophia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And that I hope, someday, you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Forgiveness. The words hung between us, heavy and complicated. It was something I'd been grappling with for months, something that didn't come easily. But sitting across from her now, seeing the pain and regret in her eyes, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about absolving her, it was about freeing myself from the bitterness that had been weighing me down. "I'm working on it, Sophia," I said quietly. "I don't know when, but I'm trying." She reached across the table, hesitating before touching my hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the closing of a chapter we'd both been stuck in for too long. "I hope you find happiness, Tom," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You deserve it." "You too," I replied, and for the first time, I meant it. We sat there for a while longer, talking about nothing and everything, until the weight between us started to lift. Just a little. When we finally parted ways, it was with a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. As I walked back to my car, I looked up at the sky, the clouds parting just enough to let the sun through. It felt like a small sign, a reminder that life was still full of possibilities, even after the darkest of storms. Weeks passed, and I found myself settling into a new normal. Sophia and I kept our distance, exchanging polite messages occasionally but otherwise living separate lives. Lucas remained a ghost, someone from my past that I no longer had room for in my present. I focused on the garden, on work, and on building something new for myself. Slowly, I started to feel whole again. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia's sister, Karen, a name that rarely popped up on my screen. The message was brief. Sophia was moving to a different city for a new job, and she wanted to see me one last time before she left. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Part of me was relieved that she was finally moving on, taking steps to rebuild her own life. But another part of me felt the familiar sting of loss, knowing that this was really the end of whatever thread had still connected us. We met at the garden, our garden, one last time. Sophia stood near the dead tree, her figure silhouetted against the fading light. She looked different, lighter somehow, as if she'd shed some of the weight she'd been carrying. "I got a job in Portland," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "It's a fresh start, something I've been needing." I nodded, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. "That's good, Sophia. I'm happy for you." We walked through the garden, the silence between us comfortable for the first time in a long while. We stopped near the spot where the old fountain had been, now replaced with a bed of bright marigolds. Sophia reached down, touching one of the flowers gently. "You've really transformed this place," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "It's beautiful." "It's still a work in progress," I admitted, thinking about how much the garden mirrored my own journey. "But it's getting there." Sophia smiled, wiping away a stray tear. "I guess that's how life is. Always a work in progress." We stood there for a moment, letting the stillness wrap around us. There was no anger, no regret, just the quiet understanding that this was our goodbye. Not just to each other, but to the versions of ourselves that had been caught in the whirlwind of mistakes and pain. Sophia turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "Thank you, Tom, for everything, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts." I nodded, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. "And thank you, Sophia. To be honest, eventually. For letting me find my own way through this." We hugged in a brief but heartfelt embrace that spoke volumes more than words ever could. As we pulled away, I felt a weight lift, knowing that this was the end of a chapter I'd been ready to close for a long time. I watched as Sophia walked away, her figure fading into the dusk. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined, but it was the one we both needed. I turned back to the garden, taking in the flowers, the trees, and the paths that had seen us at our best and our worst. The garden was still there, still growing, still changing. And so was I. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to let go of the past and embrace whatever came next. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in soft, golden light. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill my lungs. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for now, that was enough. It had been a few months since Sophia left for Portland, and life had settled into a calm I hadn't known in years. I filled my days with work, photography, and the garden, each small task a reminder that I was moving forward. My house, once filled with the weight of unspoken arguments and missed chances, now felt like a home again, my home. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the backyard, putting the finishing touches on a new flower bed. The dead tree, once a painful symbol of everything lost, had been removed and replaced by a sturdy oak sapling. It was still small, still growing, but it stood tall, a promise of new beginnings. As I worked, I heard the gate creak open, followed by footsteps on the gravel path. I turned to see Karen, Sophia's sister, standing by the entrance. We hadn't spoken much since Sophia left, but I'd kept her updated with the occasional text or photo of the garden. She smiled, a bit shyly, holding a small potted plant in her hands. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Karen said, glancing around the garden. "I brought this for you. Thought it might be a nice addition." I took the plant, a small lavender bush, and nodded. "Thanks, Karen. It's perfect. Come on in." We sat on the porch, watching the bees buzz around the flowers. Karen and I chatted easily, catching up on life and sharing stories about the past. It felt good, talking with someone who understood the history without all the baggage. "I wanted to thank you, Tom," Karen said, her tone sincere, "for being there for Sophia, even when things got messy. She's doing a lot better now, and I think a big part of that is because you gave her the space to figure things out." I nodded, looking out at the garden. It wasn't easy, but I'm glad she's doing well. We both needed that space. Karen reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "She asked me to give this to you. I don't know what's in it, but she said it was important." I hesitated, staring at the envelope for a moment before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note from Sophia. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything we'd been through. "Dear Tom, I'm writing this from my new place in Portland, surrounded by boxes and new beginnings. I thought I'd be scared, but all I feel is peace. And a lot of that has to do with you, your forgiveness, your willingness to listen, even when it hurts. I'm still learning to forgive myself, but knowing you're out there, finding your own path, makes it a little easier. I'm planting a garden here, too. It's small, just a few flowers and herbs, but it's a start. I guess I learned from the best. I hope you're finding your peace, Tom. You deserve every bit of it. Thank you for everything, for letting me go, and for giving me the chance to find myself again. Sophia." I folded the note carefully, feeling a rush of emotions I hadn't expected. It wasn't the grand gesture of reconciliation or some dramatic revelation. It was just two people, once bound by love and later by pain, finally finding their way to peace. Karen patted my shoulder. She really meant every word. And I think she's finally in a place where she can move forward. I nodded, feeling the truth of that in my bones. I'm glad. We both needed to find our own way. After Karen left, I planted the lavender bush she'd brought, placing it near the new oak sapling. I stood back, looking at the garden that had grown and changed as much as I had. The wounds were still there, buried beneath layers of soil and new life, but they no longer defined me. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm sun on my face, the scent of lavender and roses mingling in the air. For the first time in a long while, I felt free, free from the past, free from the anger, and free to embrace whatever came next. The garden was mine now, a testament to survival, forgiveness, and the quiet beauty of starting over. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And as I stood there, surrounded by the colors and scents of a life rebuilt, I knew that I was, too. Life had a way of surprising me when I least expected it. A year had passed since Sophia left, and in that time, I'd managed to rebuild myself piece by piece. The garden had flourished, becoming a neighborhood talking point. People often stopped by to admire it, drawn to the blend of wildflowers, carefully pruned bushes, and the proud oak that was now steadily growing in the center. It was still a work in progress. But then again, so was I. One afternoon, I was in the garden, trimming back some overgrown branches, when I heard a familiar voice call out from the gate. "Tom, wow, look at this place, it's like a magazine spread." I turned around, wiping the sweat from my brow, and saw Lucas standing there, smiling awkwardly. I hadn't seen him since the night everything fell apart, and the sight of him standing in my garden was jarring. He looked different, older, maybe more tired, but still carrying that same air of confidence. I didn't know what to feel in that moment: anger, indifference, maybe even pity. But mostly, I just felt surprised. "Lucas, didn't expect to see you here." He stepped closer, looking around at the flowers and the paths I'd meticulously crafted. "I heard about the garden from Karen. She said it was something I needed to see." I wasn't sure what to say. It was strange, having him here, walking through a space that had become my sanctuary. But I kept my composure, leaning on the rake I'd been using. "Yeah, it's been keeping me busy." Lucas nodded, his eyes taking in every detail. "It's incredible, Tom. I can see the thought and care you've put into every inch of this place." I shrugged, not entirely sure why he was here or what he was hoping to get out of this visit. "It's been good for me. A way to start fresh." He took a deep breath, his expression growing more serious. "Look, Tom, I've been wanting to reach out for a long time. To apologize. But I didn't know how, or if you'd even want to hear it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but someone who was struggling in his own way. I didn't owe him anything, no forgiveness, no second chances. But I'd learned over the past year that holding on to bitterness only kept me chained to the past. "Lucas, what happened? It hurt. A lot. But I've moved on from that. I'm not going to lie and say everything's okay, but I'm not going to hold it against you forever, either." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted. "I appreciate that, Tom. More than you know. I've made a lot of mistakes, and losing your friendship was one of the biggest ones." I didn't respond immediately, letting the words hang in the air. There was no need to rehash old wounds or dig into the details of what had gone wrong. We both knew the story too well. Instead, I motioned toward the bench near the oak tree. "You want to sit for a bit?" Lucas followed me, and we sat in silence, listening to the birds and the rustling leaves. For a while, neither of us spoke, just taking in the peaceful surroundings. It felt oddly fitting, two old friends sitting in a garden that had been born from pain, now sharing a quiet moment of reflection. "I've been in therapy," Lucas finally said, breaking the silence. "Trying to figure out why I did what I did. It's not an excuse, but I've learned a lot about myself. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better." I nodded, appreciating his honesty even if it didn't change the past. "Good. That's all any of us can do, right? Keep trying." We talked for a while longer, mostly about the garden and what we'd been up to. It wasn't an attempt to rekindle a friendship, too much had happened for that, but it was a chance to close a chapter that had been left open for far too long. When Lucas finally stood up to leave, he extended his hand. "Thanks for letting me see this, Tom. It's inspiring." I shook his hand, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. "Take care, Lucas. I hope you find what you're looking for." As he walked away, I watched him disappear down the street, his figure fading into the late afternoon light. It felt like the end of something, a final goodbye to the past and the pain that came with it. I turned back to the garden, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. This space, this life I'd built, it was mine, and it was enough. For the first time, I felt truly free of the ghosts that had haunted me for so long. The garden, once a memorial of lost love and betrayal, had grown into something new, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the quiet beauty of moving forward. I picked up my rake and went back to work, smiling to myself as I dug into the soil. There was still so much to do, but for the first time, I wasn't in a hurry. The future was wide open, and I was ready for whatever came next. The seasons were changing again, and the garden was bursting with color: roses, daisies, lavender. And the oak sapling, which had grown stronger over the past year. It had become my routine to spend each morning tending to it, the quiet rhythm of gardening grounding me in ways I never imagined. One morning, as I was mulching the flower beds, I noticed a car pull up to the curb. A woman stepped out, her hair tied back in a casual bun, and she looked around, seemingly lost. I recognized her immediately, Megan, a former colleague I hadn't seen in years. We had worked on a few projects together back in the day. And there was always an unspoken connection, a friendship that had never quite blossomed into anything more. "Tom?" she called out, her voice warm and familiar. "Is that really you?" I stood up, wiped the dirt off my hands, and smiled. "Megan, what are you doing here?" She laughed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I heard about your garden from a mutual friend and had to see it for myself." And wow, they weren't exaggerating. "This place is stunning." We hugged briefly, and I led her through the garden, showing her the different sections I'd spent so much time creating. Megan listened intently, asking questions about the plants, the layout, and the inspiration behind it all. There was an ease between us, a comfort that felt both new and familiar. "It's amazing, Tom," she said, pausing by the oak tree. "You've really built something beautiful here. I remember you always talked about wanting to do something creative, but this is next level." I chuckled, feeling a bit embarrassed by the praise. "It's been my therapy, I guess. A way to make sense of everything that happened." Megan nodded, her expression softening. "I heard about you and Sophia." "I'm sorry, Tom. That must have been really hard." I shrugged, feeling the sting of those memories lessen with each passing day. "It was. But it's in the past now. We've both moved on, and I'm just focusing on what's next." We spent the next hour catching up, talking about old friends, new jobs, and the twists life had thrown our way. Megan had moved back to town recently after years away, and she was starting her own design business. There was a spark in her eyes when she talked about her work, a passion that reminded me of why we'd connected in the first place. As we sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and watching the garden sway in the breeze, I felt something shift. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but there was a sense of possibility, of two people reconnecting at just the right time. "I've been thinking about adding a little herb garden," I said, gesturing to a corner near the fence that was still empty. "But I'm not sure where to start." Megan's face lit up. "That's one of my specialties. I'd love to help if you're up for it. We could make it something unique." I smiled, feeling a small spark of excitement. "I'd love that. I could use some help from a professional." We spent the rest of the afternoon sketching ideas, laughing, and brainstorming. It was the most fun I'd had in a long time, and for the first time, I felt the stirrings of something new, something hopeful. Megan's presence was easy, unforced, and for the first time since Sophia, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was room in my life for someone else. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting the garden in a warm golden light, Megan packed up her things but lingered at the gate. "Thanks for today, Tom. It was nice being here." "Yeah, it was," I replied, genuinely grateful. "Let's do it again soon." She nodded, smiling. "Deal. And Tom, you're doing great. I can see it. You're not just surviving, you're really living." I watched as she drove away, feeling lighter than I had in years. The garden, once a symbol of my past, was now growing into something more. It wasn't just a reminder of where I'd been, it was a celebration of where I was going. I looked at the empty corner where our herb garden would soon be and felt a sense of anticipation. There was still so much to plant, so much to grow, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The garden was still a work in progress. Just like me, but it was thriving, and so was I. As I turned back to the house, I caught a glimpse of the oak tree, standing tall and steady, its branches reaching upward. New seeds, new beginnings, it was all part of the journey. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace every single part of it. The herb garden that Megan and I had planned came together beautifully over the next few weeks. It was simple, filled with rosemary, thyme, basil, and mint, each plant carefully selected for its fragrance and utility. Megan's guidance had been invaluable, and it was clear she knew exactly how to bring the space to life. Working alongside her felt natural, and our collaboration turned into something more than just a garden project. It became a regular part of my routine, and slowly, she became a regular part of my life. It was a bright Saturday afternoon when Megan suggested we host a small garden party to celebrate the completion of the herb section. At first, I was hesitant. The garden had always been my private sanctuary, a place where I could think and heal. But something about the idea felt right. This space had grown and changed with me, and it was time to share it. We spent the morning setting up tables, hanging string lights, and preparing drinks. Megan was in her element, arranging fresh-cut flowers and helping me set up a small bar near the patio. We'd invited a few close friends, some old colleagues, and even a couple of neighbors who had watched the garden transform over the past year. As guests began to arrive, the atmosphere was light and filled with laughter. People wandered through the paths, admiring the flowers and asking questions about the design. I stood back, watching as the garden came alive with conversation and joy. It was surreal, seeing something that had once symbolized so much pain now filled with warmth and light. Megan approached me, handing me a glass of lemonade. "How does it feel, seeing everyone here?" I smiled, taking in the scene. "Honestly, it feels good. Better than I thought it would." She nudged me playfully. "See? I told you it was time to show it off. You've done something incredible here, Tom." We stood together, watching as the sun dipped lower, casting a golden hue over the garden. There was music playing softly in the background, and the sound of laughter echoed off the walls of the house. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. As the evening progressed, people gathered near the oak tree, now fully established and standing tall at the center of the yard. I found myself sharing stories about the garden, explaining the meaning behind some of the plants, though this time without the bitterness that had once colored every word. I spoke of resilience, new beginnings, and the beauty that could come from even the most painful of experiences. Megan stood by my side, her presence a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. When I finished talking, the guests clapped lightly, not out of politeness, but out of genuine appreciation for the journey that had been laid out before them. As the sun finally set and the string lights flickered on Megan and I sat on the porch, watching as people lingered, reluctant to leave the warm, inviting atmosphere we'd created. She leaned over, resting her head on my shoulder, and for the first time, I didn't flinch or pull away. I simply let it happen, letting myself enjoy the moment. "You've built something really special, Tom," she whispered. "Not just the garden, but your whole life." I looked at her, feeling a swell of gratitude and something else. Something I wasn't ready to name but was content to let grow in its own time. "We've built it," I corrected, smiling at her. "Together." Megan's smile was all the answer I needed. The future was still uncertain, still unfolding in ways I couldn't predict. But that was okay. The garden had taught me that growth was never straightforward, it was messy, beautiful, and unpredictable, much like life itself. As the last of the guests left and the garden grew quiet again, I stood by the oak tree, looking up at its branches reaching toward the night sky. It had survived its first year. Just as I had. We were both standing, both growing, both ready for whatever came next. I turned back to the house, where Megan was waiting with a warm smile, and felt a surge of hope. The garden had once been a place of reflection, a memorial of lost love and betrayal. Now, it was a symbol of everything I'd built, a life rebuilt from the ground up, full of new possibilities and endless potential. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to keep planting, keep growing, and keep moving forward. And just like that, under the soft glow of the lights and the watchful branches of the oak, I realized that this was more than just a garden party. It was a celebration of life, love, and the quiet power of starting over.